Hello, everyone, and welcome to the third InterSpiritual Luminaries webinar for the Spiritual Guidance Training Institute. And I'm Jan Lundy, the co-founder, co-director, and I am with...
Hi, everybody. I am Jeanette Banishak, co-founder and director.
And we have Ed Bastian with us today, and we're going to introduce him in just a moment. Be turning that over to Jeanette. But we just want to give you a reminder of the protocol for today. We will not be taking, we will not be doing video and audio for participants, but you may participate by locating the chat icon on your dashboard and typing in any questions, thoughts, impressions, whatever you'd like to share with us for the next hour. And we welcome that. We'll start out with a few questions that we have thought about for Ed, but very much welcome your questions for him. And so we begin. Jeanette?
Okay. All right. Well, we are so happy to be here together in this space that feels a little bit real and surreal at the same time. And I'm going to give you a little bit of an intro to Ed, and then we're going to pause it and have a contemplative practice, and then I'll ask my first question and we'll get the conversation going. And I wanted to say first off about Ed that he said he wholeheartedly agreed to participating in our third webinar, and he said, we want to make sure that we have fun. And I said, well, what do you mean by fun? Because I'm in a training with Ed, getting facilitator training for InterSpiritual Meditation. And we had so much fun there. And I just want to tell a little story about what I was imagining fun would be in this webinar based on my experience in New Mexico this past summer. So we were explaining InterSpiritual Meditation to each other and practicing it. And there were a couple of college students who said, I think we should do the 7 steps, which we'll learn about these steps later on in this webinar. Let's do it as a wrap. And so we ran it by Ed and we said, what if we tried this after our talk? He's like, absolutely, let's try it. And so we did this meditation as a wrap, and we laughed so hard and had so much fun. So when Ed said, we're going to have fun in the webinar, I'm thinking, is he going to wrap? What is this going to be? So I'm going to read what we have for you, Ed, before you have a chance to talk and wrap, perhaps. Ed Bastian is the founding president of the Spiritual Paths Foundation, and that's spiritualpaths.net, that provides interspiritual programs, books, websites, and for the study of meditation and the application of contemplative values and insights in the world. And these programs and resources enable people to, in quotes, lead from within by developing a spiritual foundation to guide their work for the common good. And Ed's teachings include InterSpiritual Meditation, the mandala process, mindfulness meditation, Buddhism, spirit and nature, and end of life. Ed Bastian's doctorate is in Buddhist studies and Western philosophy from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, under the guidance of Geshe Lungdo Sopa. He studied for nearly a decade with Buddhist monks in monasteries in the US, India, and the Himalayas. As a Fulbright scholar, he studied Indian philosophy at Benares Hindu University, Sarnath and Sera Monastery, and translated Buddhist scriptures from Tibetan and Sanskrit sources. Dr. Bastian is the award-winning author of InterSpiritual Meditation, a 7-step process from the world's spiritual traditions, Mandala, creating an authentic spiritual path, meditations for inner spiritual practice, and living fully, dying well. There's much more that you can learn about him in his books and online and on spiritualpaths.net, but we'll keep it at that for the moment and see what unravels here in this time together. And thought that we would like to begin in a very SGTI way, with some silence before we get into the conversation. So I want to invite you to take a moment, close your eyes if that's comfortable for you. Otherwise, maybe fixate them on something 6 to 8 feet in front of you. Find a comfortable position and we'll sit in silence here for a couple of minutes. And let's gently come out of the official time of silence. And Ed, I didn't give you a chance to respond to that whole intro and the wrap and all that fun, but I'll start with the first question and you can feel free to respond if you want. Thanks for joining us today. And the first question that we wanted to start with is, why are you doing the work that you're doing with InterSpirituality specifically?
Well, I should be prepared for this. But I find that whenever I think about it, new things come up, or a variety of things. So it's not like a, you know, how we are when we meet somebody new and we have sort of our set kind of bio that we say that kind of gives us sort of our identity is, excuse me, gotta turn this on. Where our identity, you know, we sort of solidify our identity. I did this, I did that, I did that, I did that, and so I find that sometimes it's more fun just to think of things that made you more vulnerable. Or so I'm open-minded right now, and I'm thinking that when I was a little kid, when I was a child, probably my first memories, I grew up in Iowa. And when the fall came along, I used to get horrible asthma, and oftentimes our family doctor used to come over in the middle of the night to give me adrenaline shots to keep me alive. And I think so from an early stage in my life, I was just really aware of the fragility of life and the possibility of and what my greatest fear was of just going out of existence. So that stayed with me. Then when I was about 8 or 9 or 10, I can't really remember, again in an Iowa night, you know, for those of you who grew up in the Midwest, you know, in the late summer, the cicadas are buzzing and your windows open, trying to get a little bit of air in through a very hot, muggy evening. And I remember lying there, and I started to get so worried about dying, and I got scared. I was like in a cold sweat, lying in my bed, and I said, I have to pray, but I don't know who I'm praying to. I don't know what, but I prayed. I said, please tell me that if I die, when I die, what's going to happen? And why am I here? How did I come into this life? And then it was one of those, a voice spoke. And it wasn't like a booming voice that filled the whole house. It was like a voice that came to me. It was a resonant voice. And the voice said, you exist in a dream. Now, in my 8-year-old mind, or 9, or however I was, I really wasn't ready for that. I hadn't studied Jungian, dream theory or anything like that. It was like, whoa. And so ever since that time, that's been kind of my question. What did that mean?
Wow.
And and every year as I progress in my own spiritual insight and development and awakening, a nuance comes to me about what that meant. And so I think I was just sort of set up from an early age to be interested in these kind of deeper issues of life and spirituality. And then, of course, I grew up in the 60s, late 60s. I was basically an all-American boy, was going to just do what I was supposed to do. I played basketball at Iowa and was the governor of Boys State, and I was just going to be the goody-goody, tall white kid that was going to look after the affairs of my very privileged lifestyle. Maybe become a lawyer and defend our class interests. And that all began to fall apart after a number of experiences, but in politics. And I was also had hitchhiked around the world during that period, and I got introduced to Buddhism. I was in Vietnam for a while as a war photographer and saw what was happening with the Buddhist monks. I didn't see it personally, but the immolations that they were doing. And I was doing a film in '70 that included an interview with the Dalai Lama. And the Dalai Lama was not a superstar yet. And I was asked to ask him questions. And so I did. And after our interview, I was so taken by him, I asked, could I come back here and study when the film was over? And he said, yeah, come back and see me. So I had that extraordinary opportunity when I was in my mid-20s to go and spend time in Dharamsala before it was a scene, and spend a number of times with him talking. And I was so impressed because he was not pushing Buddhism. He was talking about the beauty of all the world's great spiritual traditions. And he would answer my questions about Buddhism and give me my first teachings. But he was very, what we called it in the day, ecumenical, and very broad in his approach. And that impressed me so much, and open. And he fixed me up with my first meditation teacher, and then I kind of began my path. But I was always interested, even as I became very involved in Buddhism, I was always interested in the world's great traditions. And kind of fast forward to a time when I was working at the Smithsonian in the mid-'80s in DC, and it occurred to me that, I was now kind of a card-carrying Buddhist and doing my Buddhist meditation. I was teaching Buddhism in DC at the Smithsonian, but my colleagues of my generation had been experimenting with lots of different religions that had come into our country at that time, and I saw that they were not really settling on any one, that they weren't going deep into anything, and that they were collecting a great bookshelf with great books. They were going to a number of great lectures, but they weren't really developing a spiritual path, that was really meaningful to them. So that's when I first began on this project, was to say, maybe I should try to create some kind of an education system, a way for people to get educated in the world's great spiritual traditions and contemplative traditions, so that they could, in a very sensible way, create their own path, even if they called themselves primarily Jewish or Christian or Muslim, that they could also be very open and learn from the world's great traditions. Then I had the good fortune of, I moved to Colorado and in the late 80s and the 90s, and became very close to Father Thomas Keating, who I'm sure you all know about centering prayer and the contemplative practices of Christianity that he revived. And he invited a group of people every year to St. Benedict's Monastery who were meditators from many different traditions. And after we got to know each other, he said, well, why don't you come? And with a twinkle in his eye, and said, come and be the Buddhist. And so we laughed, and I joined that group. And it happened to me at that point that I was so impressed and moved by the contemplative practices of my colleagues that my arrogance as a Buddhist meditator, that Buddhism had sort of like the lock on deep contemplative practice, completely dissolved. And my interest deepened in the world's contemplative traditions, and I was being so enriched by them that when I was able to then start a nonprofit organization of myself, it was dedicated to that work. So although my training is in Buddhism, I teach it, my work really is to try to help people of all different kinds of styles and predispositions and backgrounds to try to develop their own path, based on the deep wisdom of many, many different traditions. So that's kind of long-winded. Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Can I ask kind of backtrack a little bit just to make sure we're all on the same page in terms of terms?
Yeah.
We talk about interspirituality, and in our institute, we use the text, The Mystic Heart by Wayne Teasdale. And he has a specific definition of interspirituality.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, it is the sharing of ultimate experiences across traditions.
Mm-hmm.
And I just wonder if you could add your definition of interspirituality into the conversation so we're all on the same page too.
Good. I love that. And that's what I experienced working with Father Thomas Keating in that group. Because we would meditate together, each in silence, and each would doing their own thing. But what I experienced was that if we're all sitting, for example, if we were all sitting, now all of us now on this call, sitting around a great pond together, right? The pond is very still, and we're all dropping a little pebble into the pond from where we sit around the edge. And then the rings from that pebbles begin to go out, and then they begin to merge with each other. And they cross each other. They keep their same identity as they move across, but they have become porous to each other. And so when we sat in contemplative silence with each other, I felt a palpable energy. I don't know what the word is, but we were sharing at a deep level of contemplative consciousness with each other. And once we were there, we shared at the heart, that deep level of consciousness. We were linked forever. We were brothers and sisters. We couldn't look at each other as the other ever again because we were joined at that level of our being. So I think that's what Wayne is alluding to. And that I love that quote that you... And we adopted InterSpiritual and just after his book was published. Because this we at that point was people like Cynthia Bourgeot and Rami Shapiro and Kabir and Camille Helminski and Swami Atmarupananda and 40 other teachers that I invited in to teach with us over that period. And we needed a word to describe what we were doing. And Brother Wayne came up with it. And so we started using that word in like 1973, 2003 or so. And so, yeah, and we're just kind of staying with it. Let's own it and give it meaning and give it purpose and help together, you and I and all of us working together to help mature it and give it meaning and resonance. And gradually we're all defining it through our mutual participation in it.
Yeah, thank you for that. And thank you for that beautiful image that now I think so many of us think in images. We can hold that image in our heart of everyone sitting around the pond with the pebbles dropping in. That's beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah, Ed, to hear that story like that was a real treat. It felt very special. Thanks for starting so long ago with the story, and to have this recording for forever with you telling that story feels really also very special. We align deeply with the work that you're doing at the SGTI, and you are a friend, of course, and you are a mentor to us, and we have learned so much from you. We use your material in our cohort, the InterSpiritual Meditation book specifically, and in it you defined meditation as attuning consciousness. And so I was hearing your story around Snowmass, Colorado, with all the good folks, and how you were attuning your consciousness together. So the next question is about that. What are some examples of InterSpiritual meditation? What are some examples of how we might attune our consciousness, however that means? And I'd love for you to talk about the 7-step process if you want in this. Otherwise, I will. But it's your process.
Well, I think you guys are really aware of the variety of interspiritual practices that are beginning to emerge. And to me, the key is, and it may seem kind of radical, and until you feel it, you don't really know that it's possible, is where we soften the rigid boundaries around the identities that have been so carefully crafted over our lifetimes. We can identify ourselves by the name of our religion or the name of our practice, by our agnosticism, by our atheism, by our ethnicity, by our gender, by our whatever pronouns we might be choosing to use for ourselves as we wander through life. But especially when it comes to religion and spirituality, people tend to develop, I think, very kind of rigid boundaries around that, because I think we have a natural inclination to be afraid of uncertainty. We want to know what is the truth, and many of us have struggled, read lots and meditated lots and found teachers, and we become quite attached to it, and going deep within a tradition is really important, I think. But then when we form that rigid boundary around it, then it becomes a bit antithetical to the fundamental premise of love and compassion and sharing and giving and receiving, reciprocity. So making ourselves porous, I think, is to me one of the key elements for whatever practice we do, whether it's interspiritual meditation or interspiritual liturgy or interspiritual dialogue, interspiritual contemplation, and there'll be more forms, in the coming years. But I think that porousness, and it's a little bit like in the Christian contemplative traditions, I think, is kenosis. It's releasing, it's giving up, so that our false self can give way to something which is truer. And of course, that will vary. That definition of what's truer is going to vary from one tradition to the next. But if we open ourselves to it, it's just a beautiful thing. And yes, there might be some threat, some uncertainty that'll come, but by challenging ourselves, our own tradition and our own internal practice will become stronger. As these kind of moments of uncertainty and fear begin to arise, if we allow ourselves to be open and giving and loving and receptive, to me, that's the best antidote of all and the best path forward.
I hear that, and I want to say yes, exclamation point. And my fear in engaging with InterSpiritual meditation is how do we integrate wisdom from all these sources without misappropriating, without misinterpreting, without watering down?
No, I agree. I think that's the great challenge here.
Yeah.
At the one hand, I say, because I went pretty deep into Buddhism, and I felt it was great to get formed within a tradition is great, because you kind of begin, like if you do a PhD or a master's, or you go deep within a subject, you learn the criteria of truth within that particular tradition or that subject or that, and gaining that sort of capacity to know what you don't know, and to be open and honest about it. And so going deep is important, I feel. However, the 35% or more of Americans now that claim no religious background, what's to happen to them? They're not going to have a great teacher down the block to talk to. So we can't impose a rigid, truth test on everybody. Everybody needs meaning and purpose, a reason for being in their life. And so if we can help them find that by drawing carefully wisdom from a variety of sources to help them along their way, I think that's important. But the methodology we use, the processes we use, also help people to discern what's appropriate and not appropriate, what's appropriating and what's not appropriating. So there might be some specific, say in a Zen koan practice, right? That came out of a combination of Buddhism and Taoism. And it had a specific purpose in mind, and I'm going to paraphrase it. It may not be true for everybody, but to jettison your consciousness away from rigid dualities, and to give up the conceptual framework that is the foundation for your gnosis, your Sophia, your wisdom, your prajna, and the foundation of your practice. But in Buddhism, the absolute truth is emptiness, right? So that koan practice may not be appropriate to adapt if you're more theistically involved, right? So similarly, within Christianity, there might be a rosary practice, that you might do as a Catholic. Well, you wouldn't necessarily want to mix that with a Buddhist practice. So I think the thing that we have to help people to learn and to discern is what is appropriate and what's not appropriate, as we begin this commingling. And I think that's the role of a mentor. It's the role of a facilitator. It's the role of somebody who's become more mature in this, that as the people that we're helping come along, we can ask the right question to see if they are everybody has to discern this for themselves in the end, but we can help them, to bring in the practices and the wisdom that are going to fit well with each other and serve their interest in the long term.
It reminds me, Elizabeth Drescher in her book, Choosing Our Religion, talks about how some people fear how the spiritual but not religious, the nuns, the spiritual interdependent independents, they don't have a morality. Where does the morality come from? And she says that, in the qualitative research that there's a real deep ethic of care that people have. For each other, for the world, for pets, for food, for creation, for others' ideas, for stuff, etc. And so, I think about how to. So we also are interested. We have a lot of people who are interested in either working with or they identify as spiritual but not religious, and they want to participate in practices, and they don't want to abuse the practices. They don't want to abuse the tradition. So they say, all right, so I need to learn an amount about this particular tradition. Like I need to learn some things. Who are the people? Who are the leaders of the tradition? What are they saying about the tradition? What are the practices? And then they connect it with their ethic of care.
Well, I mean, when you do interspirituality and you're looking at the world's great traditions, love and compassion, golden rule, they're all there at the heart of all the great traditions. They're at the heart of the great secular, the laws that we live by have derived from earlier religious traditions. So it's there. You can't avoid it if you're going into it. So and to engage in a contemplative practice without love and compassion and gratitude and the elements that we've integrated into InterSpiritual meditation you wouldn't have a complete practice without it. And if your intention is not love and compassion, then you're doing a disservice to yourself and to all the people you interact with. So cultivating love and compassion and using the prayers, the meditations, the rationale from a variety of sources can help us strengthen that love and compassion that we can apply to our practice if we call ourselves interspiritual. The Ten Commandments exist in one form or another in almost every religion. So, yeah. I think.
Well, I was appreciating the discerning question of what is appropriate, what's not appropriate, but connected to the styles, connected to your learning styles, your spiritual styles, connected to a time in your life, connected to perhaps who is your mentor in this moment, connected to community. Mm-hmm. And those answers will change in time, and really having a discerning heart and mind for what is true in this moment for me.
Mm-hmm. Well, you mentioned styles. So I think one of the distinguishing characteristics about this method that I've been working on is, and been trying to derive from many sources, and now with you and the facilitators that are involved, I grow a lot with every interaction, with you and everybody, is a recognition that we all have our own archetypal styles. The Enneagram is an example of that. Myers-Briggs is an example of that. Howard Gardner's multiple intelligence is an example of that. Even astrology is an example. These ways of helping us to understand the nature of our being, our personalities. And so I helped start a school in 1970 in Aspen called the Aspen Community School. And it was maybe one of the first schools in the country to call it, we call ourselves child-centered, but that became more refined to learning style-centered. We felt that our job as teachers was to help the student to learn how they learn. And as our job as teachers was to teach the students the way they learn, not to impose a one-size-fits-all curriculum, and pedagogy that would leave off all the other people that didn't learn our way. So what we found is that in public education, private education, religious education, over time, the teaching methodology has narrowed and narrowed and narrowed to certain types of learners, oftentimes reflecting the personality of the priest or the rabbi or whoever, whether it's more intellectual or it's more devotional or it's more nature-based, etc. I learned by doing elementary education, secondary education, the importance of helping each student to understand how they learn. And my job then as a teacher is to help them to understand the way they learn. I found that echoed in Buddhism and many of the world's great traditions, is that great teachers would often begin with that question, well, how do you know? How do you learn? Let me help you to understand my tradition through the lenses that you're looking at it, not through mine, not imposing, not preaching, not dictating, not being dogmatic in one way. So this interspiritual meditation begins with people doing a spiritual styles instrument that, I had to come up with. I was waiting for help to do it. And finally I just said, well, screw it. I'll just have to come up with the questions to do the instrument. And the idea is to do the instrument, not to try to predict who you are for now and forevermore, but for you to become aware of the 12 types of archetypal spiritual styles that reside in the depths of your own consciousness. And those are predetermining the way in which you are viewing the world. They become the lenses through which you become interested in a spiritual tradition, that you define or refine your interests, that you filter out one from another, and you develop your own practice internally. So we all have these 12 circulating, and some of us may be more intellectual at this stage in our life, or some might be more devotional, or some might be more mystical, or some might be more kinesthetic, more into nature, etc. So it's important to know that about ourselves and say, okay, well, let me work with who I am. Let me now seek out teachings on nature and the meaning of God, or what happens when I die, from the world's great traditions, right through the way I learn. Let me ask my questions through the way I learn of the world's great traditions. And then gradually you'll see that, well, maybe my strong point was nature, my weak point might be using my mind. Or weak meaning, less dominant at this stage of my life. Well, maybe at some point it'd be helpful for you to get some reasons to support your faith and your devotion, or your way of being in nature. So over time, we learn to discover, to honor, and to harness and to harmonize our spiritual styles, so that all of the ways in which we are internally are on the same team. They're all working together. They're all supporting each other. So we don't have our mystical experience happening here, and then our intellect saying, well, that's a load of crap. What are you talking about? The world doesn't look like that. That's not the way it is. But then if you learn from many of the great mystics of all different traditions, who also were great intellects, and they had a rationale that explained why that mystical experience makes sense. So then you can balance yourself internally. You don't have that schizophrenia, that kind of, I'm either mystical or I'm smart. Which one are you? You begin to meld things. You begin to meld the body. You begin to meld the devotion, and so forth. So spiritual styles is something that we focus on a lot in this methodology, in this process.
And that's personally one of the pieces that I love and really appreciate about it, as somebody who's been working in education for over 20 years.
Yeah.
But connecting it to meditation, that was a step that I had never imagined doing, and honoring that I've got to get in nature, and I don't necessarily want to sit in silence for 2 hours. I'd rather get in nature and walk for 2 hours. Yeah. And saying that is valid, that is great, and that is me. Mm-hmm. And so then who are my teachers who are doing nature meditations and learning with and from them? Mm-hmm. Or if I'm relationally based, which, personally my top two are nature and relationships. Mm-hmm. And so, who are the people or what does it look like to meditate and have interpersonal relationship as a spiritual style? And then who are the people doing that, connecting with them like we are in this moment?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah.
There are many myths or falsehoods about interspirituality. And what I'm hearing you say is that maybe this approach that you are using is a middle path between two of the myths. One, which is there is a universal religion which we all need to join. Mm-hmm. And the other, that we're just going to make a patchwork quilt and it's not going to have any depth. Yeah. So what I'm hearing you say is that there is a middle way where we are paving our own path by listening deeply and discerning and really understanding in the deepest way possible how we are experiencing the mystery or the divine or oneness or love. Is there still a danger that we are creating our own religion?
Is that a danger?
I'm playing devil's advocate.
No, I love it.
We hear that. We do hear that. Well, then you're just creating your own religion. You're just creating God the way you want it to be. Right. Yeah. So I'm just wondering how do you explain to people that you're not doing that you are listening, honoring, discerning in a different way?
Well, I think that my experience, limited as it is that no matter what you call yourself, I'm a good Christian, I'm a good Jew, I'm a good Muslim, you're going to pick and choose what works for you within that tradition. Right? You could be a Catholic and you don't like the policies regarding gender. You don't like the policies regarding no females in the priesthood. So you may not even be wild about, a certain way of looking at the Trinity, or Jesus, as a guy, or Mary Magdalene as a prostitute, which has largely changed recently. But so I think no matter what we call ourselves, we do pick and choose. And I think, and I used to give my fellow teachers the names that I mentioned earlier, because we would do our programs together when we did our Spiritual Paths Institute. And then at the end, I'm kind of the lone Buddhist sitting there in the room. And they just start talking about God. And I'm thinking, and I would just say, stop it. You all believe that God is something different anyway. So why do you even say we all believe, at least we all believe in God? Because if you all say what you believe in God, it's going to be a little different, right? So what are you actually believing in that's come? So I think we all, just in the nature of human nature, is we create our own view internally. And if our view is a little different than our neighbors, we just don't talk about it. We just say, for the sake of peace among us and for a community getting along with each other and world peace, we all want to say, at least we all believe in God. So at least there is that sense we all have this sort of unifying thread that pulls us together. I think it's much more fun to honor the diversity, personally. Because when you look at biodiversity, right, diversity is what is required for life, right? Every ecosystem has got to have this amazing diversity. And every individual member of any species relies on that diversity for their own existence. And in fact, religions grew out of diversity. Say that melting pot in the Middle East, in North Africa and Persia and Saudi Arabia, and, in India, there are all kinds of ideas that were circulating of different religions, out of which, Islam as we know it, and Christianity as we know it, Hinduism as we know it, Buddhism all emerged. Because it was in that wonderfully diverse argument in which people were rubbing shoulders with each other, sharing ideas with each other, choosing what works best for them, and then certain sects and traditions developed out of that. So what we know for sure is there's diversity. What we don't know for sure is if there's a God the way you look at it, or the way I look at it. So I just love the honoring of the diversity as a kind of the fundamental thing. And then however you look at God or don't look at God is kind of irrelevant. But I just love who you are, and I honor who you are. I want to support you in becoming the best human being you can possibly become. And to me, that's a more solid, realistic foundation for the development of a spiritual path and a religion.
Oh, thank you for sharing that, Ed. Thank you very much. I also want to remind our participants that there is a chat feature here, and that if you have a question for Ed, you may click on the chat icon on your screen and you can type in a question, and we will see that and translate it over to Ed.
Which isn't to deny the existence of God. I mean, this is interspirituality is evolving now to have different flavors, right? Some are more theistic, some are more non-theistic, some are more, there's a whole variety of flavors. So depending on, and I'm sort of more Buddhistic, right? So I'm Buddhist. I mean, a lot of my contemplative practice is Buddhist, but I'm interspiritual in terms of my way of being. You might be more Christian as kind of your foundation, or somebody in your group or one of your students are more Jewish or more Islam or more agnostic, or, that's just, that's beautiful. As we honor each other's way of looking at the divine, of understanding the divine, and knowing that we're all on a long trajectory. As every year we're refining our understanding and developing our practice. And if you're a Buddhist or Hindu, you believe this trajectory goes on infinitely for multiple lifetimes. So where we stand right now with our practice, is just kind of where we are in this long, beautiful evolutionary trajectory that each of us are on individually to become, what we consider to be the divine or ideal being. right? Or not?
Come on.
You don't have to agree. I just,
Oh, well, Jen, do you have a question? Because I had another one.
No.
Okay.
I think we're all in agreement here. I mean, our stance is very much the same as yours, of course, and that's why we use your material in our program. No, I'm just enjoying your perspective and taking it in and thinking, this is so wonderful for us to be having this kind of conversation that is diverse and inclusive. Everybody belongs. Everyone belongs.
I love it too.
Yeah.
So what initially we had asked that we were going to ask the question, what distinguishes interspiritual from interfaith? But now I want to ask it a little bit more nuanced after this conversation, if I may, and that is, what's the relationship between interspiritual and interfaith, or interspirituality and interfaith?
Well, my experience, which is really all I can speak to authentically, I think, is that when I was younger, the ecumenism was, starting to come on the scene. And that really had to do with, I think people of Christian, they call themselves Christians or Catholics, getting along with each other. And then it began to expand to Abrahamic. Well, we all, the Muslims and Jews and Christians all come out of a common source. So maybe we should be expanding this now to think of interfaith, because we share so many values in common, and we share a belief in God that seems to be very much the same, and we share the Old Testament. And so interfaith then became kind of a new way that people could come together, but the words that were being used at the time come together with tolerance and respect. So we would come together politely with each other. We would listen to the different perspectives. We wouldn't argue with each other. And say, thank you very much. We agreed to live and coexist with each other peacefully. Then the work of Thomas Merton, and Abhishektananda and some others, Indian sort of cross between Christian and Hindu, and Wayne Teasdale, Father Thomas Keating, others began to explore with more legitimacy, I think, the possibility that in our contemplative practices, we're reaching, at least phenomenologically, a similar place. Our contemplative practices lead us to a state of deep peace, of deep compassion for each other and love. And then, depending on your tradition, a kind of a non-dual relationship with the divine. The divine might be called and defined differently among the traditions, but we will not claim or demand that your view of God is the same as mine. And that began to give way then to the interspiritual framework. And so I think it's been an evolutionary process. So, but interfaith is still very necessary. I've been president of the Interfaith Initiative here, and we work, and we have a showers truck for the homeless, and we do a lot of work with the interfaith group to do it. And yesterday we had a board meeting, and the cantor from B'nai B'rith is the head of our group, and he reminded me, he said, anti-Semitism is on the rise again. So interfaith is still really important. We still need these forums of people to come together to talk to each other out of respect and tolerance and finding our commonality. Interspiritual has the audacity to try to take us to that level, that contemplative level, and explore that together, and even to share with each other, try each other's and share. And again, that gets back to the porosity kind of thing that I was talking about earlier. So I think they're all needed, all important. Yeah.
Ed, that ties in really well. We have a question from Hillary, and it's a great segue, I think. She says, thank you, Ed. I'm a Buddhist hospital chaplain, and don't generally tell patients what my tradition is. And yet I do offer them practices when I sense that they are open and could benefit from them. Do you have any suggestions for how to invite in practices from a different tradition from what someone practices to support them to understand enough of where it comes from and how to use it well? I know that each practice would be different, and yet I'm curious about your perspective.
Oh, it's a really good question. I know a number of chaplains that have the same conundrum, and I know a woman who's a Buddhist chaplain in LA who she's called in to be the chaplain for other Buddhists, that happen to be in the hospital. But Buddhists come from Thailand and Burma and Cambodia and all over the place. And so those people who are Buddhists want to see a Buddhist nun or monk from their tradition. So they're not necessarily open to what she has to say. And so what I think is, but I don't do your work, but I do a lot of work with with in this area, but not as a professional like you, is that breath is a common element, and working with breath in all the traditions. If it's breath within Christianity or the ancient, I think spiritus in the Latin, connotes breath, and it connotes the deep, essential essence of who we are. And we don't need to be sectarian when we talk about creating a mindfulness-like. It doesn't even have to be called mindfulness, because that's often associated with Buddhism, but it could be, a way to become calm, a way to do a body scan, a way to do a breath meditation. And if that person shows an inclination to be Buddhist or Hindu or Muslim or none of the above, then it could just be deeply connecting with the essence of your own being and relaxing into that. And in all the traditions, from what I can see, and I do a lot of work now on end of life from a Buddhist perspective and from others, there is a kind of sense that at the final moment of life, there's something like a clear light that happens. That there's kind of the essence of who one really is emerges. And if we can learn to be relaxed and calm and to breathe and to be open to that moment of transition, to that revelation of that last moment, and that last moment then becomes the vehicle to be doing your prayers, your Hail Marys, your Our Fathers, your meditations, whatever it might be, then it's going to ease one's way into the next stage of one's existence. And but I think we can develop, and you can develop, a kind of a neutral way of approaching that. And it doesn't matter that you're Buddhist. You're a chaplain who has love for them and wants to help them, and you could just kind of work with breath. Yeah, just an idea. Yeah.
Thank you. And Hillary says, thank you so much. That's very helpful.
Good. I respect your work so much, Hillary. That is really just amazing to do. People who do hospice work are a marvel to me. Yeah.
Well, Jeanette, and Ed, we are just a few minutes away from our time together being complete, unfortunately. We could go a lot longer, but we did promise our participants an hour. I suppose if we need to go a little longer for some folks, we can do that and keep the recording going, and anybody who needs to step off right on the hour could do that. We had talked about doing a little bit of a meditation or contemplative practice together.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I wondered if we could ask one other thing of you, Ed, because we feel newish in this endeavor. we'll be celebrating our third year in April, early April. We have our third cohort going, and we have a 5-month program going. And there aren't a lot of folks doing kind of professional work and trainings with an interspiritual focus. And I'd love to hear any advice that you might offer off the cuff for us going forward.
Well, I think, Jeanette, we both know that we're all new.
Yeah.
You know, the fact that I've been doing it for not 20 years, but almost, still really, in the scope of things, is still very new. And I find that that one of the most important things is for us all to work with each other. And people who are experimenting and trying things in various locations around the country and around the world, be open to conversations with each other about it. And what are we learning from each other, learning on ourselves, on our own? What can we learn in dialogue with each other without one person having sort of the lock on the whole deal? And I think it's a time of openness and experimentation and kind of celebration of the opportunity that we have to move in this direction with a humility that we really don't know for sure. And I think that that's kind of the way it is with spirituality. You know, when we get to a point of absolute locked-in certainty, then something happens in our life that will shake it. So I think that, you know, what you're doing is great, creating a curriculum, creating a process, creating courses, creating these interactive forum for people to engage, and who can question, who can doubt, who can suggest new ideas is really important. And I think we're holding space for a much larger movement that's kind of beginning to, you know, appear kind of from the bottom up. And we're really early. We're pathfinders.
Yeah.
So patience and communication, fun.
Yeah, and I think of our students too, who, you know, they are learning to be spiritual guides, spiritual companions, spiritual directors with this interspiritual, interfaith focus, and they are pioneers.
That's for sure.
And to be commended for stepping into the arena with this broad, inclusive, heart-centered view. So.
I don't think that the difference is that if you're being formed within a tradition, then you have a boss. You know, you have the priest, and the spiritual direction is not about being a boss necessarily, but there is kind of a very set criteria for what it means to be formed within a specific tradition. Right? So people can be a little more certain, a little more bossy about it, right? But in ours, we're inviting and helping other people to create their path. So we're walking a path with them as friends and encouraging them without feeling like we are responsible to teach them all about everything. We don't have to be the expert on Jewish, you know, the Kabbalah, which one of our mentees might be interested in. But we can encourage it, and maybe because of our experience, we might know some resources that'll be helpful to them, and we can be a good listening ear to help them express it, you know, and in this sort of Parker Palmer-ish kind of circle of trust, inviting, you know, leading from within, helping them educare, right, to leading out rather than dogmatically implanting in, to help them discover their own truth. And that's the whole point, I think, what we're trying to do now, and what I've been trying to work on, is developing a process within which that can happen. It's a process, it's not a dogmatic solution. So the extent to which we can walk with people like that, I think, is the extent to which we're really fulfilling our mission. Yeah.
Thank you.
Now it's time for the wrap, right?
Now it's time for the wrap. Drop a beat, Ed. Drop a beat. Y'all, thanks for being on this, and for others who will listen later. This has been a real treat for Jen and me and all of us at the Spiritual Guidance Training Institute. Ed, this was fun. This was illuminating, and a good way for us to keep the questions, to perhaps change some questions that are no longer useful, to begin to ask new questions, to be curious about new things. So thank you.
As long as you don't, I'm glad it might have been illuminating, but as long as you don't call me a luminary, I'm happy.
You're not a luminary.
Forget about it. We're walking this path together and figuring it out together, and I love being with you and whoever is on the call with us. Thank you so much for being engaged, playing together.
Yeah. Well, the practice that we're going to end with is a practice that Ed Bastian has created, and he asked me to do it. I'm getting facilitator training, so it's all good to do it. Even though Ed is on this call, I'm happy to do it. And I wanted to.
One thing, I didn't create it.
You did not create it. How would you say it?
You know, we've been doing programs for almost 20 years, and I would listen carefully to the different teachers, how they teach. And so my job was to try to discern the process steps that people use within these various contemplative practices. So basically, I was kind of compiling and putting together, but I wasn't making it up. You know what I mean? Like the creator, like an artist creating a new painting. It was like, and then I would experiment with this every time we did a program. You know, at the end, I would say, well, here's what InterSpiritual meditation looks to me like now. Mm-hmm. And so over time, then people would listen and they'd add their 2 cents and critique, and so it was that kind of creative process. But it wasn't like me, the guru creator kind of thing.
No. And as a former instructor of creativity, what is new is it new in a moment for everyone for all time, or is it new for a particular group? Is it new for you, right? And no one really is creating anything out of nothing anyways, because we have culture and history. And so, yes, I'm there. I think I still might use the word create though, but unless you don't want me to. All right. So this is a 7-step process that can be usually 10 to 20 minutes. We're going to do it in about 5. And with the hopes that you can take it with you and practice it out in whatever ways and times are going to be useful for you. I loved what you said about breath being the common element. So I thought maybe in this round of doing the 7 steps, we'll be the whole time focusing on the breath. So find yourself in a comfortable position. Keep your eyes closed, if that's okay. Otherwise, fixed on something 6 to 8 feet in front of you. And in these 7 steps, each of the steps begins with may we be, or may I be, sort of a wish or intention for us all together. May we be happy and healthy. As you breathe in what happiness and healthiness is to you, take a long, deep breath in. And a nourishing exhale out. May we be grateful. Again, take a long breath in as you consider what gratitude means for you in this moment. And exhale. May we be transformed. As you take a breath in, consider what transformation looks like, could look like, has looked like. And exhale. May we be loving and compassionate. Breathe in deep love and compassion. Exhale love and compassion. May we be mindful through our breathing. Breathing in. And breathing out, we are mindful. Take another breath in. Exhale. May we be wise through meditation. Breathe in wisdom. And breathe out wisdom. Take a couple more deep breaths. Breathing in wisdom and breathing out wisdom. May we be in service to all. Breathe in service to others and to yourself. And breathe out service to others and yourself. And if your eyes are closed, when you're ready, open your eyes.
Thank you, Jeanette.
Yeah. Jan, you're the brains behind this webinar. Thanks for everything behind it. The brain and heart child.
Thank you, and thanks for your guidance and great questions as always, Jeanette. And Ed, what a pleasure to have you. We feel so honored and thrilled to have spent this time with you, and that we've got it for posterity also. And many blessings as you go forward. And we want to remind everyone once more about your website too, spiritualpaths.net, correct?
Paths plural. Yep.
Yes, paths plural, spiritualpaths.net. And you can learn all about Ed's wonderful work in the world and his books and InterSpiritual Meditation training as well. So thank you. Many blessings. And thank you for everyone who joined us today. And for those who will be listening later, we hold all of you in thought, heart, and prayer. And may we meet each other in that beautiful place of the mystic heart and continue to walk this interspiritual journey together as pioneers and way showers and learners, always learning, right? All right. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye for now.
Everybody.